Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a real mind-bending round when I put David Lynch's Eraserhead against Darren Aronofsky's Pie. And like I said, this one was a real mind-bendy, crazy one. And as you can tell by the tinsel wig on my head, it's about to get a lot crazier. So let's just start it right off. You know, the first feature-length film by David Lynch was Eraserhead. And you know, clearly early, you could all, like certain directors like David Lynch, they have a clear, distinct voice when they have their first film. And you can definitely tell that David Lynch has a very like distinct style and voice, and really like, and for, as a disclaimer for both of these movies, I'm not even going to really attempt to try to explain what the fuck went on in these movies. But I have theories of my own, but they ain't set in stone because, like, you know, I don't even think like David Lynch even really knows what the fuck his movies were doing, you know. But you know what, Eraserhead at its core is a nightmare, you know, where Fellini put his dreams on the screen, David Lynch put his nightmares on the screen. And weirdly enough, like David Lynch's nightmares almost look as beautiful as Fellini's dreams, you know. And the title character, you know, you can clearly tell by the dude's haircut, you know, it looks like a fucking eraser. John Nance, who was a regular in David Lynch's like stock company of actors, and it at times looks a lot like Tim Robbins, and you know, also can easily be a surrogate for David Lynch, you know. And the film itself is like seething with anxiety. Of course, like I said, it's a fucking nightmare. Like Salvador Dali understands nothing of surrealism compared to David Lynch, you know, although Lynch could probably be more described as like Kafka-esque, you know. This definitely has like heavy Kafka vibes, and you know, the only other person to really come close to like nailing Kafka in the cinema was Soderbergh with the movie Kafka. But that's neither here nor there. When it comes to Lynch, though, like you really just that he doesn't tell you a lot of shit. You know, there's not a lot of dialogue in it. There's no voiceover. You know, you just see the inside of this man's mind as he's going through like some really weird shit. You know, and for me, it all goes back to sex. You know, that opening of the film is very like 2001 A Space Odyssey, where it almost even better than 2001 A Space Odyssey. And in a way, like you see this like fucking alien fetus looking thing come out of this dude's mouth, John Nance, the Eraserhead, and it goes into like this little puddle of like water, but that could easily be like construed as a vagina, and then that's him getting his chick pregnant, because in the next thing you see is, you know, the chick is acting all weird, you know, he hadn't seen her in a while, she hadn't come by, and all of a sudden she's got this premature like abomination, I guess you can call it. You know, looks like nobody ever really knew what the fuck he created that thing out of. But whatever the fuck they did it well. You know, they really like fucking nailed like the craziness. Honestly, like even on like a H.R. Geiger kind of scale, you know, like even predating Alien when that thing pops out of William Hurt's chest. You know, this is like a film that's like clearly afraid of sex, you know, and that could come from like the repressed era that David Lynch was born into, you know. And, you know, most people that came of age in the 1950s were usually like sexually repressed. And, you know, I mean, this guy found like industrial, like warehouse factory noises like comforting, you know. So he's clearly a disturbed individual, but obviously a very great artist, because like the film itself is like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but the imagery is so vibrant. And, you know, like there's a lot of weird shit going on. And honestly, this movie is the reason why I do not eat Cornish game hens, because those little fucking chickens that they have in probably the most uncomfortable dinner sequence since Solo, the 120 Days of Sodom. You know, I don't even think, like, I'd rather watch Le Grand Bouffe than watch this dinner sequence. Like, this movie is very unsettling, and it's not hitting you over the head with it. You know, David Lynch, like, puts all of his like fear and anxiety into this film, and really just encapsulates you into this experience. And even at the end, you know, of course, he's got the sexy neighbor that's tempting him, you know, and he's like having to be with this abomination, and then he ends up killing it. And, you know, in a weird way, kind of a art house roundabout way of making an abortion movie, you know, kill the abominations, whatever the fuck. But you know, it's one of the, and it just ends, you know, for all I know, the dude died, you know, I don't fucking know. You know, that's the beauty of David Lynch. And most of his shit is so open to interpretation. Anybody claiming to know what the fuck is going on, or even attempting to understand what the fuck is going on, is lame as fuck. You know, because I mean, I love cinema, but I'm not about to sit down and watch every David Lynch movie frame by frame, trying to figure out, I just see what you did there, David. I don't give a fuck. Honestly, David, wherever the hell David Lynch is now, he's probably laughing at all you motherfuckers trying to decipher his movies. And he probably sitting in, you know, a room with a checkered floor with a little midget talking his ear off, or just having a staring contest with him, you know. So, like, we move forward to Darren Aronofsky's first feature film, Pi, which, shot in black and white, just like Eraserhead. But this one is a little more, I guess, easier to swallow, I could say. And I think that's due in large part to its really good techno soundtrack. You know, that's the beauty of Eraserhead, is that there's no soundtrack, there's no music. So I mean, there's that song with the gal with the lumps on her face dancing and the squeaky singing. You know, David Lynch had a thing for squeaky voice singers, and which is fine. You know, it works. You know, great dream sequence and shit, especially when she's stamping on those little fucking alien fetuses and shit. But with Pi, it centers around this guy who seems like a less annoying version of Edward Norton, and he's like a numbers guy, you know, mathematician, and he's really obsessed with the number pi, and they're trying to find something. Then he ends up with some Hasidic Jews that are trying to find some shit in the Torah, and then there's Wall Street people, you know, because these numbers are going to affect Wall Street. So there's all kinds of conspiracies, you know, and the film is shot, you know, a very grainy, saturated black and white cinematography. And it's that looks cool. It almost feels like a fucking extended Nine Inch Nails music video, but it's got voiceover, and the voiceover a lot of times, unless you're Scorsese, you can very rarely pull off the fucking voiceover, because, you know, it's just lazy writing. And when you've seen somebody like David Lynch give you the same kind of nightmare, way more in your face, and not fucking hardly say a word. You know, that's a true cinematic artist. Now, I get it. You probably need all the math and shit, but there could have been dialogue sequences in there. You know, it could have been like, you know, Beautiful Mind type shit or something. But, you know, but clearly, like, just like David Lynch, so you can see a distinct voice that Darren Aronofsky has as a filmmaker. But unlike Lynch, his voice changes over time. You know, like every like third or fourth movie he does is like kind of a mainstream movie to see, like, oh, can I do this kind of thing? Or, you know, nothing else of his even remotely resembles Pi, maybe Mother, but, you know, it's one of those movies that, like, the ending kind of ruins it too, because, like, you go through all this shit, dude just drills a hole in his head and everything's okay. It's like ignorance is bliss type of shit. Give me a fucking break, no Carter. That's the beauty. Another beauty of Eraserhead is that it doesn't fucking, like, leave you feeling good at all. Like, even though it's like kind of ends on a high note, you know, he's dancing with the gal with the lumps and shit, and it just fucking ends. You know, that's you know, could be interpreted as he died and went to his version of heaven, you know. But clearly this round has to go to Eraserhead, because, like, nobody was as original as David Lynch. You know, mind you, like, the cinema, both of these movies do show the links of, like, what cinema can do, and how you don't really have to, like, adhere to any rules or standards and shit. You can make whatever the fuck you want to make. Will people watch it? That's a whole other fucking thing. But as long as you're happy with it, that's all that fucking matters. And there was no doubt in anybody's mind that David Lynch was happy with every single movie he made, maybe with the exception of Dune and whatever movie the studio tried to take away from him. But you can clearly see Eraserhead is, you know, pure Lynch. You know, there's nothing that he's the reason. The Eraserhead is basically the reason why there's his own adjective for films. You know, when films have Lynchian vibes, you know exactly what the fuck they're talking about. And, you know, as far as the nightmare scenario goes, like, Eraserhead is way more chilling than Pi. Pi is like, you know, that fucking way, that watered down 90s shit, you know, and it's like, yeah, sure, film bros can pick it apart here and there the same way they do Eraserhead, but the end of the day, you know, David Lynch is also a better director than Darren Aronofsky. He's not wrapped up, or he wasn't wrapped up in his own bullshit. You know, rest in peace, David Lynch. So if anybody's keeping score, that's 27-24. The 70s are up by 3. Like, man, the 70s have been killing it, you know. I mean, but, you know, they had some of the greatest cinematic artists getting their start, or like doing some of their best work, you know. And this was a real, Eraserhead was a real midnight favorite and stuff. It's like Pi, it's like another movie that tries to take itself too seriously. And like, you know, a movie that the less you show, the better, and the less you say, the better. If you can convey what you're trying to get across with as little words as possible, then you're a true cinematic artist. Because let's not forget that the cinema didn't talk when it first started. You know, it went a whole like fucking nearly 30 years without saying a word, and had some of the best fucking like art that you've ever seen in your life. And still to this day, motherfuckers can't even compare with that shit. Lynch understood it. There are few directors that can understand the power of the moving image. Like, you can have movies where people are just talking, and there's ways to make that vibrant and shit too. But you throw in a voiceover and that doesn't have a purpose, and plus if the motherfucker's half annoying or full annoying, it's just gonna ruin it. So it's better to just show instead of tell. So, like I said, if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, mind you, some of these movies can be debated even further. You know, so if you want to debate me, I'll debate anybody. I don't give a fuck. You know, eviscerate me in the comments. I don't care. This is a rough draft to a doctoral thesis. You know, I got a long way to go before I figure out who is the best decade, the 70s or the 90s. But right now, the 70s are up by 3. So looks like I've been right all the time. But, you know, as we've seen, that shit goes up and down. So it's a real roller coaster, but I'm having fun.